Congressman Seth Magaziner, welcome back to Bartholomew Town.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
We're on the heels today of what was a UFC event on the lawn of the White House. It really kind of personifies the idiocracy of the moment in real time. But just from your standpoint, what is it like right now to be in Washington as a part of the opposition, trying to do something, as you have oftentimes signaled, trying to do something to impact the flow of what seems to be more and more craziness, chaos, and dystopia every single week?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about this second Trump administration is that they're not even trying to pretend that this is about helping the average person anymore. And, my job is to advocate for working Rhode Islanders, for people who work hard for a living, not for the entrenched special interests. And instead, what you have now is a reality in Washington where they just cut taxes by trillions of dollars for billionaires and big corporations while cutting health care and SNAP benefits for the middle class and for poor people. They are spending taxpayer money on these elaborate monuments for Donald Trump and then turning around and saying that there isn't enough money, to meet the basic needs of the American people. And just the grift is off the charts, right? The president of the United States selling cryptocurrency out of the White House, all of these shady real estate deals getting done. Even last night with the UFC fight, I think one of the under-discussed elements of that fight is that, the Ellison family made a lot of money off of streaming the fight. The Trumps were selling their cryptocurrency, advertising their cryptocurrency during the fight. But, to the average fan who maybe likes, UFC, who wanted to watch, it wasn't free for them to watch. So again, it's the average person is subsidizing the incredible wealth of the elites. And that's the way it's been throughout the administration. So on the one hand, if you ask, what is it like for me as a member of Congress who's trying to fight for the average person, it's incredibly frustrating just to see people losing their health insurance, people not being able to afford food, people not being able to afford housing at the same time that their hard-earned taxpayer dollars are being used to subsidize the lavish lifestyles of Donald Trump and his friends. But it also means that electorally, Democrats, I think, are in a good position heading to the midterms because more and more people who voted for Trump are saying this is not what we signed up for.
Right. And I'd like to get back to the affordability issue that you just really raised right there. But also, while we're on it here, in terms of contemporarily, do you buy anything from this administration when it comes to Iran right now? The notion that we have a deal, no matter what,
No.
who is a signee on this deal, no matter what the parameters are, does it even matter at this point?
Well, look, the president broke his promise to the American people by getting us into an unnecessary war. It's cost us a lot of money. It has degraded our stocks of munitions, and it's cost innocent lives, the lives of American service members and the lives of a lot of innocent civilians as well. And for what? The best case scenario is some sort of a deal that gets us a worse outcome than what we had under Obama's Iran deal. I mean, the Republicans raked President Obama over the coals for that deal, which, I think opened up something like $1 billion and a half dollars of frozen assets for the Iranians in exchange for freezing their nuclear program. Now, under this framework that the president is talking about, they're giving numbers like $300 billion, again, of taxpayer dollars to the Iranians on top of the tens of billions of dollars that have already been spent on the war. It was a terrible move all around. Now, look, I hope that this deal sticks or some version of it because we can't continue spending lives and money and wasting, our resources and our best and brightest on these unnecessary wars. We need to turn our focus back to helping people here at home. But, if your question is, do we believe that this one is going to stick? I don't know. I mean, the president has said that Iran is within days of giving up something like 30 times in the last couple months. And unfortunately, you just can't trust what he says. But I hope that the conflict can end and we can get back to doing what the American people want us to do, which is actually have a government that focuses on improving the lives of Americans and not just serving the ego of the person in the White House.
What is the goal here? What do you think the goal is, or what have you been told the goal is when it comes to Iran and when it comes to kind of the Trump 2 international position of when you look at Venezuela, when you look at what's likely to happen in Cuba, things have shifted. American, quite frankly, empire building has shifted, and it's just now, it just seems so surface level that this is what's happening. But what are you hearing? What do you know?
Well, my sense is that, the president is losing his mental faculties. He is very obsessed with his what his legacy is going to be. And in his mind, his legacy is not defined by how many people he helps, how many people get access to health care or housing or anything like that. He thinks of himself as an old school imperialist, and he wants to make his mark on the map. And in that context where, he has imperialist tendencies and declining faculties, other people are taking advantage of him. Netanyahu has been trying for 30 years to get American presidents to launch an attack against Iran. And Trump is the first one who he was able to convince to do it. Similarly, Marco Rubio and, I think some of the South Florida, voices have always wanted the United States to take military action against Cuba, against Venezuela, and others. And so, with Trump, they see someone who is impressionable, who's sort of a weak leader, doesn't have clear convictions, but thinks that the way that he will establish his legacy is by changing the map somehow. And it's caused us to go into this series of violent and costly misadventures that have not made anything better for anyone. I mean, in Venezuela, the new government is just as bad as the old one when it comes to human rights and repressing people. In Iran, it seems that the same will be the case. And again, like, what have the American people gotten out of any of this? Costs are up, not down. The deficit is larger, not smaller. And, people here in America are feeling left behind.
How does that sentiment you just described it there turn into electoral victories for Democrats this autumn?
Well, I think the key thing is that we need to not just be the anti-Trump party, but we need to run on an affirmative agenda for how we are going to deliver something better and different for the American people. And so I have been in a series of conversations led by Hakeem Jeffries, our House Democratic leader. We expect that we are going to be announcing the House Democrats' agenda for what we will do when we take back the majority, I think in July. I've seen some drafts. I've given feedback on the drafts. We're pretty close. And I think what you can expect is basically a 3-tier platform for how we are going to end this chaos and make lives better for the average American. First, there'll be a focus on affordability, making it easier for people to afford housing, making it easier for people to afford food, also making it easier for people to afford care for their family members, both early in life and elder care as well. So that'll be the first plank. The second plank is improving healthcare. And to be clear, that doesn't mean just restoring all of the disastrous cuts under the Trump administration, although we do need to do that. But it also means going farther and introducing a comprehensive set of bills that will lower people's premiums and expand access to care. And then the third plank is going to be taking on the corruption that is really fueling all of this economic inequality that we're seeing. Like, the reason that Washington does not work well for the average person these days is because of the corruption. Like, that is the underlying cause. And we need to root it out wherever it is. I've got my bill to ban members of Congress and the president from trading stocks. I expect that will be part of the agenda. But we're also going to go after all of it. No more cryptocurrency being sold out of the Oval Office. No more dark money flooding elections. Real reforms to the Supreme Court, which we haven't had in decades, but are desperately needed. So you got to be careful with these things, not to have a laundry list so long that people don't have, a clear sense of your priorities. But I think broadly, our agenda is going to be affordability, improving healthcare, and cracking down on corruption. We're going to announce that in the next few weeks. And that, I think, in addition to just the total disconnect on display from the Trump administration and the Republicans, where they are clearly focused more on vanity projects than they are on actually helping the American people, will power us to a big win in November.
I want to touch on the insider trading and just sort of get into that a little bit in just a moment. But just back to the affordability question, how much of that plan or how much of your thinking right now is based on indications of a changing workforce, indications of a changing world because of AI, and how much of it is based on the idea that we're going to have, whether it's a moratorium or an awakening of some kind when it comes to AI, that won't be as much of a disruptor as some of the predictions that we see right now?
Let me take that question in a couple of parts. So first, when it comes to affordability generally, it's important for people to understand that the affordability crisis that we have now didn't happen due to some unforeseen external force, right? This isn't like a natural disaster or COVID or something like that. The affordability crisis that we have right now is because of bad decisions that were made in Washington that need to be corrected. The tariffs that Trump put in place is making life more expensive. They need to be reversed. The war needs to be ended. The cost of housing is too high because we've made it too hard to build in America. And by the way, Democrats share some blame for that as well. That's not a partisan issue. Same is true on energy. We've made it too hard to build the transmission lines that are needed to connect affordable clean energy to the grid. So a lot of the affordability crisis that we face, it's not because of some external new force. It's because of bad policy choices that can and should be corrected, and that I'm going to fight very hard to correct, especially when Democrats are back in the majority and are able to set the agenda. To your question about AI, I think there is a reason for concern here. We know that AI, and we've heard from some of the people who are more bullish on AI, that the technology has some great positive potential to do things like help with new drug discovery and advancing technology and so forth. But we also have, I think, good reason to be concerned in a number of ways. There are right now no consumer safeguards in place in the law to prevent people from using AI to build weapons, to launch cyber attacks, to build bioweapons, which I think is actually one of the biggest risks. And so there needs to be a real consumer safety regime that is mandatory, not voluntary, like the current framework under the Trump administration. Job displacement is something else that we should be very concerned about. I think you're already starting to see it in some sectors, and the government needs a plan. I've been talking with a colleague of mine, Nikki Budzinski from Illinois. Um, there's something called TAA, Trade Adjustment Assistance. This is an old program from a few decades ago that was created so that when, say, a factory shuts down because the jobs are being moved overseas due to a bad trade deal, that there would be some assistance in place for, not just unemployment, but job training and the like for people whose jobs are impacted through trade. We could use a similar framework for AI. We need a plan. And then, when it comes to energy costs, yeah, for sure. I think there's actually a risk and an opportunity there. Big data centers can absolutely drive up energy costs if regulators don't do their jobs. But one of the things that I think is an opportunity is that the big data center companies, and these are primarily like some of the biggest companies in the world, like Amazon, like Meta, which also known as Facebook. There is such a gold rush going on right now, and they have so much money that I actually think in some cases, not in some cases, in cases with those big companies, you could actually require them to spend more than what it costs, to run their own data center, and they could actually subsidize the rest of the electrical grid and bring down energy costs for people. But you need smart regulation in order to mandate that, and you also need to maintain a level of local control so that if a community just doesn't want a data center, they have that right. All of this is to say that like AI is very complicated, and you need to have smart people with the right values in charge of crafting the legislation and crafting the regulations. What you have instead under the Trump regime is it's the Wild West. And, the big AI companies have lavished Trump with gifts and, from a golden iPhone to, sponsoring the UFC fight last night. in exchange for basically no regulation at all, except for voluntary regulation, which is not really regulation, right?
Right.
And so you got to put the adults back in charge to actually come up with a framework that will allow the positive aspects of AI to continue, but protect jobs, protect lower energy costs, and protect people from the dangerous applications of the technology.
What do you think of Senator Sanders' idea, something along the lines of the Alaska Permanent Fund that would, in essence, give a 50% stake of all of the AI companies to the American people through a one-time tax, basically making the American people partners with AI mega companies? This is something actually President Trump in some ways has signaled some support for as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as the biggest companies in the world continue to get larger and richer, and everyone else is being left behind. Um, we need to find a way to ensure that all Americans can share in that wealth and that prosperity. And so, whether that is some sort of a ownership sharing or revenue sharing model, like Senator Sanders proposed, or just taxing taxing capital gains, taxing the rich more, which is something that I very much support. We need to have a fairer system of revenue distribution in this country, for sure. But that is, I think, like a valid idea, but it's not a replacement for the other things that I'm talking about, which is that you also need to focus on on consumer safety, on job displacement, and on managing energy costs as well.
All right, we have just a couple of minutes here. You've done some work on insider trading. Now it's expanded into the prediction market space, which is a wild space. I mean, let's
Yes.
be honest about it. I mean, you've got George Santos, a former colleague of yours, actually, who placed a bet on whether or not he would attend the State of the Union. He placed a bet that he wouldn't. Actually, I should say he entered into a contract that he wouldn't show up at the State of the Union, and then or that he would show up, then he didn't show. Whatever the case is, he rigged it. And
Yeah.
it's very simple to do so from an inside trading standpoint. That's one example. There are probably many others. Kalshi and the other prediction markets, they say they look into this stuff. There have been some sanctions. But how does that fuel into your overall insider trading work that you've been doing when it comes to stock trading by members of Congress?
Yeah. I mean, there are a number of different ways in which corruption in Washington have just totally rigged the system against the average people and average person, and this is one of them. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we need to do, and that I think we will do as part of this anti-corruption plank when House Democrats take the majority back. Certainly, banning stock trading by members of Congress and the White House and the Supreme Court has been one of my top priorities. My bill, which is called the Restore Trust in Government Act, now 190 House members have signed on, which is a big number. No more than 80 had signed on to any stock trading bill before the last Congress. So we've really ramped that up, and I think we're going to get it done. Prediction markets, like you said, are the Wild West. Not only members of Congress, but like anyone really in a government role should not be trading on elections or on public policy on prediction markets. One of the wildest, craziest things is, like, if you go on Kalshi right now, you could actually, I'm not going to do this, but you could actually bet on whether my stock trading ban bill will pass. Like, that is actually like an account on Kalshi that people trade on. It's insane. And then I think there's also a real move to ban certain types of trading for everyone. And look, I'm generally like this is a free country. I think people should be allowed to bet their money on stupid things with the right guardrails in place. However, betting on war, betting on military action, I think there's some real obvious problems with that, both morally and in terms of like the safety of our troops. So that is probably something that those platforms should not be allowed to offer. And then a different but related subject, sports betting. We have sports betting, obviously, in Rhode Island and most places across the country. And again, my general view is it's a free country. If that's what people want to use their money for, fine. But sports betting is also very heavily regulated in Rhode Island and in other states around the country. And these online platforms are now offering sports betting, but they're saying, oh, it's not really betting, so we shouldn't be regulated like gambling. It's something different, when it obviously is not something different. And so there's a lot that needs to be dealt with in that space as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's a whole arena of conversation when it comes to, is gambling something that any civilized, organized society should sanction in general? And I think that that's a fair question. I know that, again, that the freedom of opportunity, that argument is fair, but I think it's a reasonable question to say, hey, wait a second, is this something that we want to be in league with, as a
Yeah.
country, as a state? But at the same time, the outcomes are mostly people having a good time.
Yeah, I mean, look, I personally don't gamble. I've never enjoyed it. Like, I don't have necessarily a moral qualm. Again, if that's what people want to spend their time and money on, then fine. But and by the way, before, for example, lotteries were public entities, um, that was a major driver of organized crime in this country in the mid 20th century. Was that gaming was illegal, and so the only place to go was to the mob essentially. But that being said, we regulate it very carefully in Rhode Island and in other places, right? There's a certain amount of transparency over what the odds are. There, are all kinds of rules to prevent money laundering, to prevent, people from being taken advantage of. And again, on these prediction markets, like none of that exists. And even like online sports books like FanDuel and stuff like that, like they have agreed to a lot of regulation, but Kalshi, Predicted, all of these new trading platforms are essentially unregulated right now, and that's not good for anybody.
Congressman Magaziner, thanks so much for your time today. Our friends at the Coast Guard House have a new summer program starting this Thursday at 3 o'clock, Sound Waves, and it features DJ Dayglow. Bob Leonard from the Coast Guard House and DJ Dayglow join us here to talk about what's happening in Narragansett. Bob, what was the idea behind this?
We wanted to bring entertainment back to the deck. Spinning vinyl records is nostalgic, just like the Coast Guard House is.
It's an interesting parallel, the analog musical performance, sitting by the ocean, kind of slowing down and going back to the roots. Is that the idea here, DJ Dayglow?
That's definitely it. I really love creating intentional spaces with my music. So really picking records, slowing down, picking music that I think really complements the summer sounds of the Coast Guard House and the beachy vibes. I think it's going to be really exciting.
Bob, I think we got to get one of the sign-offs if you'd be so willing.
See friends, see food, see view. The Coast Guard House restaurant.